The attention is being returned to the head, the brain, the energy field that holds the brain integrity. The impact in the brain is in part genetic in nature, and in the the element here is in some way an aspect of blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
There is, on the one hand, a direct transference of DNA material which created this physical body. The experiences of the male and female genetic contributions forming this body carried with them on the DNA sequence distortions, as it is now known to be in the scientific knowledge of the present time.
Epigenetics.
The trauma as such experienced by the father in a time of human warfare.
Mm-hmm. World War II.
That is correct. The father experienced an event, as the story was told, in a train station in the country of England, in which he was present during a bombing. The percussive power of the explosions killed many people, but did not kill the father. He physically recovered with very few injuries, but received deep wounding in his psyche, particularly at the base of the brainstem. That imprint imprinted itself on the growing fetus, which then became Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the percussive nature of the event, there was a tear, a hole in the blueprint, which allowed or facilitated a connection to the genetic line. And whenever there was involvement in war situations for many generations on the genetic line, it lodged or created a space for distortion in the blueprint. It was the Second World War in its immediacy. However, the echoes further out along the genetic lines can be heard and resonated and attracted to that spot.
Does that go backwards as well as forwards in the genetic line?
One can see it very clearly in the backwards vision. One can also see it in the present form, as that each percussion upon the planet Earth of a warlike nature reverberates through that placement in the nervous system, the brain.
Mm-hmm.
In a forward timeline motion, there is potential to receive further reverberations and damage. However, the choice is available to the wording. Let us scan for the wording, please. Remove from the frequency of the blueprint and the genetic and the cellular information holding aspects that which could be in resonance with warlike percussive events. In simple terms, one can change the channel.
And would the healing reverberate through the genetic line, forwards and backwards, as well as sideways?
The message will travel in the directions mentioned, and the events already recorded on a timeline do not change in their histography. One does not change the facts and agreements of former battles, but one changes the channel away from the frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
There are lessons in this for all of humanity.
I have a question regarding something that my husband learned when he was being introduced to the Akashic records, that there was a layer, he called it an emotional layer, on top of each record. And you could see the record with or without the emotional layer. Is this similar? That you don't change the facts of what happened, but the meaning given to it.
It could be said that that observation comes from one with great discernment, and it is from our perspective, a very accurate perception. As on the earth plane, the purpose of coming to the earth plane as it is understood is to experience the full range, the full palette of human emotion. And therefore, actions upon the planet Earth are interspersed with emotional overlays and aspects. To be able to discern the connecting points between the emotional layer and the events allows one to, if one desires, enter the emotional field and, with intention, unsnap, as it were, the connecting points of emotion to the physical events.
Thank you. So, if this is for the good of all humanity, then can we snap those connections between percussive incidents and the emotional impact of them entering?
It is in the awareness of some people already working on Earth, as also in Jennifer's awareness, that one can snap in or snap out, as is appropriate, the various layers of energy fields in the process of aiding people to wholeness and functioning at a level more closely aligned with their soul's purpose in each life.
Very good. All right, so how would you suggest that we proceed with this, starting with Jennifer's self, or should we approach it with her father? Can we heal her father's experience of that event first? What would you recommend?
The healing comes through the intention of the individual whose consciousness is seeking a change, which the saying is, there is no healing without a change of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it is possible only to change the consciousness of one's self.
Mm-hmm.
So the beginning point, therefore, is to address the consciousness of Jennifer and her entirety in relation to another consciousness who would be, therefore, her physical father.
Mm-hmm. So therefore, on Jennifer's behalf, I would ask that this be done.
This process being of the most delicate nature, it is appropriate to request the assistance of those beings, consciousness, who in fact have the knowledge of the procedures to do so.
A psychic medical team?
Indeed. And those people who, not people as such, those beings who, now here is a new piece of information. We do not leave the problem. We open the door to a new piece of observation. There are teams, one would say, with knowledge of such alterations in consciousness, who are free to transit between places of occupation, therefore planet Earth, Palladian system, Arcturian system, and places not necessarily named as such at this time, but they are free to travel and are accepted where they go because they have knowledge of, one would call healing, one would call recalibration, learning, but it is a change and a shift in consciousness, which all societies, all collectives, in whatever form, require in their developments.
Well, then may we call upon these teams?
I believe that one is ready and has already been called in.
Excellent. Is Jennifer's grandfather in attendance, the doctor?
Now he is with also the one who was his father. And they seem, even with their stiff collars, quite delighted. Because it seems to be that this is the first time that the barrier, the veil that has separated them, has come down, and they can share their knowledge as equals in a team.
Fantastic.
They are delighted to participate and to observe.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and they are most welcome. Maybe if you could describe the procedure as it takes place.
Yes, the suspension of the light body on what would seem to be cords as such, like being in sort of a sling with various parts and cords, so that the light body would be facing downward, so the availability of the back of the head and spine would be facing upward. There is the group, the collective team, arrays itself around in a ring, and the wording comes that there is a mind meld. So each of the aspects of the team, although they are separate entities as such, they are melded as one mind, so that their collective intelligence is amplified exponentially in relation to their numbers. The grandfathers are asked to keep to the outside of the circle and observe, as their excitement is a little bit. They're very excited. Yes. And the great-grandfather now understands that his abilities as a medical intuitive come from that collective, and he is grateful.
Wonderful.
And through the collective sight, it appears that in the texture of the brainstem, there is what would appear, if one would describe a sliver of glass, if one can imagine the history that is known to the local area as the Halifax explosion. Much glass shattered and flew. And this is in a metaphorical sense, but it takes the shape of a sliver of fractured and flying glass. razor sharp and razor thin. So the team is perceiving that the elements of the earth, that would be the literal minerals of the earth that have been and are continued to be used by human hands to create structures and tools and shelters, are still connected to their elemental selves. That would be iron and silicon, anything of the earth in their primary state. And when they are used in a warlike state, the percussive nature of their use ricochets out and disturbs the domains, the kingdoms, the domain of the mineral domain, the domain of the wood. Each natural domain is damaged by the percussive nature, and yet the mineral domain and the wood domain and the elements such like hold their original state of being and their original integrity. And the mind-meld condition communicates with the original integrity of the elements embedded in the sliver, and asks that it withdraw its consciousness and return that consciousness back into the domain, whether it be mineral or wood or whatever. And that is the procedure used as a matter of communicating with frequency. Once the extraction process has been complete, because they do know what they're doing, the site of the extraction is examined to determine the extent of the cellular injury or damage held within the physical form. When the assessment of the injury and damage is complete, a consultation as to the most appropriate actions, treatment, is held within the melded minds. Ideas are exchanged, examined for veracity, for effectiveness, for the longevity and permanency of the restoration, and the ripple effects of any actions taken. It is decided that an open wound is not appropriate to be maintained. Therefore, a communication with the internal aspects of the cells at the site of the opening. Therefore, the perception and the vision draws itself into what one would call passing through the atomic level of these cells and into the subatomic level of the cells, and reaching to the very edge of the quantum field which each of those cells is in contact. The repair begins in the quantum field, which it appears would be a contact point of the blueprint. So repair is being asked for at the blueprint level where it meets the quantum field. It is a procedure not often undertaken and refers to a question heard about a future aspect and the nature of contact with the future. This procedure is from or exists in what would appear on a timeline as part of a future aspect.
Does this experience serve to hasten the advance of such procedures onto our timeline?
It is a time, no, there's a correction for the verb. The introduction of such procedures on a timeline has already begun. It is fair to say that the nature of this procedure is of interest to certain humans upon the planet, and that once it is shared, it will be comprehended by a growing number of individuals upon the planet. However, in the measurement of time in years and centuries, the current point in time is not openly conducive to deep and wide sharing. There are souls who remain in spirit at this time for some time, who are actively assisting others in spirit and those upon the earth in bringing this knowledge. The feeling of them is that they have very light hearts. It is, in a way, repairing the fabric of the universe where it may be damaged or torn.
How is the procedure going now?
It is now in a time of rest. One would observe that the consciousness that is observing this and the consciousness that is receiving this is now as if they cannot no longer see it. It's past even their abilities to observe and see. However, it is like being in a place of no longer needing to know, because it is done. And there is a time of almost unconscious rest.
Would it be possible to ask more questions then at this time? Leave that subject? Would it disturb the procedure if we ask more questions? Or do we need to let it rest?
I believe that, yes, it is to thank those who came together to do the procedure and to observe, and that we remove our state of attention to other matters. Yes.
Very good. Well, I would like to thank very deeply the assembled team who have been working on this procedure and the grandfathers for being part of this, and I hope it will reverberate very widely the consequences, the impact of this procedure, and result in a real contribution to the shift on this planet. So I thank you very deeply. Is that going to have an impact on Jennifer's nervous system?
We pull back our attention and awareness to take what one would call a wider scope, as if one opens the aperture in a camera and looks to a wider scope. And the view in that scope would suggest that in the timeline there is a marker of a 6-month timeline for an integration in the physical cells of the nervous system, a healing, as it were. As all changes on the energetic levels, although in some cases can be rapid, are in most cases in accordance with the physical nature of a body. Therefore, healing, although excellent in its nature, is measured in time, and measurement in time is an aspect of allowing the integration of the emotional and psychological aspects of the being to adjust their outlooks to the new physical arrangement.
So we will look ahead in 6 months and see how things have changed. Thank you very much. Wondering, is that something that would be worth sharing to, at least to the quantum healing community?
I'm asking for clarification of that question, please.
Well, we're using here a technique called Quantum Healing Hypnosis, and I'm part of a forum of people who are doing this kind of work and similar kinds of work. I mean, it's called quantum. It's a little different than we would hope to repair the tears in the universe, fabric of the universe, but other practitioners of hypnosis, deep healing hypnosis.
So the question is, if I may reiterate, that the procedure that was observed...
Or knowledge of it.
Indeed. It would be one of the open and receptive avenues for which such knowledge and information can enter the human earth plane at this time and be received for careful consideration.
Very good. And Dolores Cannon, who's probably listening, is involved with that forum.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And we can feel her smiling, as her smile is on Jennifer's face as she...
Yes.
Dolores is smiling and holding herself and pulling her jacket over and roaching in her chair, and she is very pleased.
Well, thank you, Dolores, for being here. I very much appreciate your continued work and being able to do this work myself. It's a great privilege.